Welcome to another episode of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is Jennifer McCollum, CEO of Linkage. I'll tell you all about Jennifer in just a moment. Those of you who have watched the show know that LinkedIn Live, we speak to thought leaders and doers like Jennifer who are making a positive difference in our world. Grace Under Pressure focuses on what's too often dismissed as the soft stuff, the caring, the connecting, and the commitment we exert toward others. Grace for me is generosity we show, the respect we give, and the compassion we demonstrate. And when you're a leader like Jennifer, especially during challenging times, it requires an acting for the benefits of all and energizing the team. So welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you, John. It's so good to be with you today.
I want to tell the folks all about you. You are CEO of Linkage, where you oversee the strategic direction and operation of this enterprise. The mission is to change the face of leadership. And gosh, I've known of Linkage forever. I know organizations that use you, and I know your conferences, and which we'll talk about, are of great value to many. What I like about Linkage, it's research based. So what you teach and you coach and educate is based on solid research, as well as a wonderful team of practitioners, and you bring in guest speakers. It's a great organization. You yourself have had 20 years experience in the real world, building businesses in leadership space. You were a decade at Korn Ferry, and you worked at the corporate executive board, which is now part of Gartner. At CEB, you were a product manager, and you led the leadership division. You built a leadership academy business and done a whole bunch of stuff. You've also served as CEO of IntraVision, and you work with public companies, startups, and all kinds of stuff. So you, like me, are a member of Marshall Goldsmith 100 Coaches, and I was welcome to have you. And you live in Chevy Chase, Maryland, with 3 children, one of whom is a freshman at University of Virginia. So anyway, welcome, Jennifer.
Thanks, John. It's really nice to be here.
Great. We talked, executives, as you know, no surprise, are under a lot of great pressure these days. What are you hearing?
So I think I want to start with acknowledging that all of us, regardless of where we are in the executive ranks, are under a great deal of pressure today in this environment. And as an example of that, for fun, before this conversation, I actually went and grabbed my vision board that I created alongside my family. We do this every single year on New Year's Eve. And it's safe to say, so I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I've got aging parents, and I'm an executive. And I run a company, as John mentioned, that is 32 years old. And we've been in the leadership development business with a mission to change the face of leadership. So you ask a really important question. If all of us are facing a lot of pressure right now, what uniquely are executives facing? And if the pressure as being a human in this environment wasn't bad enough, the 2 specific things that I'm hearing and personally feeling as well, regardless of whether your business is thriving or your business is really suffering, there's 2 things we're talking about. The first is, how do we pivot our businesses and innovate in this unprecedented time? And anyone that's had a 3-year plan, and I've been the CEO for a little less than 3 years at Linkage, I've had 3 different 3-year plans. Those are actually being ripped up right now. And even our 1-year plan is continuing to be revised. So how do we pivot our business and innovate in a time where things are so uncertain is just a massive challenge. The second, go ahead.
Please.
And so the result of that is really we're having to live much more real time, much more day to day, and that creates an enormous amount of pressure. And then the second thing quickly is really pointed inward at our employees and at our staff. How do we keep them engaged? How do we keep them connected? We thought this would be a few weeks, then a few months. Now it looks like a few years. So we're turning to the question, what may never be the same? And how do we ensure that all of our staff, and by extension, our partners and our vendors and our supply chain, feels incredibly connected to us when we can't see each other live?
Great. Well, I know Linkage experienced a significant pivot because a part of your business, a substantive part, was conferences. And I believe one has been canceled, but you've moved quickly into the digital space. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so the rapid adjustment to the digital reality has hit everybody. Whether you're just focused on the digital reality for your employees, at Linkage, we had a digital reality that we had to face for all of our clients. So as I mentioned, we've been in the leadership development space for 3 decades. That has largely been, before I arrived at Linkage, largely been live conferences, live training and development. So we've made some pretty significant investments already into virtual platforms and digital platforms. Just as part of our natural innovation, we had to rapidly accelerate that. And so to your point, for the very first time in the 21st year of the Women in Leadership Institute, we will be 100% virtual, and we've been able to really innovate in that space. At the same time, we're working with all of our clients to help everybody get more comfortable. Nobody wanted to learn live a decade ago. People were still resistant to digital and virtual, and now it's our reality, and people are really starting to embrace it a lot more quickly.
That's a great story because one of the things that, and you alluded to that, our world has been turned upside down, as you illustrated even with your graphic there that you do with your kids. You were telling me nothing really, it's all different. So what that means is we're living in this life of ambiguity, but you have provided some clarity to that. So.
Yeah, and actually, one of the things, if you're open to it, I'd like to talk about is what is it that we are doing, not only to provide clarity for our staff and for our clients, but what are we doing to kind of survive and thrive as we move through this crisis as leaders?
Please tell us, because there are lessons for all of us, not just those in the leadership space, but for any business. So please tell us.
So one of the things I love most about Linkage is, as you alluded to, we've been studying leaders for many, many decades. And one of the questions we continue to seek to answer is, what is it that the very best leaders actually do? And we try and codify that so we can measure and develop and support leaders and organizations. In a time of crisis, this becomes even more acute and even more important. And so there's a couple things I want to talk about quickly. And this is surfaced from what we call our purposeful leadership model. The first things that leaders need to do, especially in a crisis, is to get exceptionally grounded and aligned with their own individual purpose and how it connects to the broader purpose and direction of the organization. So I'll speak personally. My purpose is to support leaders and teams and organizations in achieving their potential. That's completely aligned with what Linkage's purpose is of changing the face of leadership and accelerating leadership effectiveness and equity. In a time of crisis, we aren't going to change that purpose, but we're going to figure out how to achieve it in a potentially more effective way. The second thing, and equally importantly, is what do leaders need to do? So our purposeful leadership model surfaces the 5 commitments, and I'm just going to rattle them out quickly. They're all outlined. I don't know if you can see it, but there's the book right behind me called Become: The Path to Purposeful Leadership. And the 5 commitments, especially in a time of crisis, become even more critical. The first is inspire. How are we providing hope and inspiration for the future, even if we can't see it perfectly well? How do you direct energy toward that vision, even if it's a 1 year or a 1 month vision, not a 3-year vision? The second is engage. This is the time to bring people together and ensure that all of us are able to contribute to our fullest potential. Inviting in diverse perspectives will help you do that. Opening yourself up to contributions from everyone, not just your favorite people or the ones that look or sound or act like you. The third is innovate. So these trying times demand much faster change. So to give you a personal example, we are trying things, learning, failing, moving on, figuring out what sticks much, much faster than we were before. The fourth is achieve. And this is less about achieving as a leader myself and more about achieving through others. So what are our systems and processes and clarity that we provide so that the team can execute? If a team is paralyzed and frozen in the midst of a crisis and waiting for the leader, we've done something wrong. So that's the achieve commitment. And the last one I love because it aligns so closely to your work, John. And we call that the commitment of become. And become is that internally focused commitment. So above all, in times of uncertainty, leaders have to be emotionally present, emotionally resilient. We have to have enough self-awareness and courage and confidence to become better every day. And I actually like, right behind you, when I see the word grace, leading with grace, especially in a crisis, becomes even more important.
Absolutely. Grace is the catalyst for the greater good. And in times of crisis, that's no excuse for not looking for it and putting it. Grace is there. We simply have to make use of it. So we have a wonderful opportunity with you here because you are an executive. And I recall as part of our early in the crisis, many of us from MG 100 got together on daily phone calls. Remember that? And I remember you were wrestling with this issue. So how have you grown as a leader in the 6 months?
So I've done a lot of reflection on this, and I actually want to give huge kudos to the group that you just mentioned. So that the Marshall Goldsmith 100 Coaches has allowed me, almost a CEO support group. It's full of so many, coaches and advisors and thought leaders and academics. But I want to actually tell you how probably the biggest impact has been my new mentor, Alan Mulally, who's been working with me very closely. And we've been talking about 3 things in terms of, as a CEO, how can I rise to this challenge? And to the extent it's helpful for other executives or leaders on this call, the first is to deal with reality. No matter how harsh it might be, it's the job of a leader to deal with difficult topics. So even though there might have been some on my board or my executive team that said, look, we can't say too much until we really know exactly what we're going to do, Alan actually encouraged me to acknowledge reality no matter how harsh it might be. Tell people what you can. Tell people what you can't yet, but tell them when you're going to know. So that was number 1. The second one was always work on the better plan. So it was important, as soon as we figured it out around April or May, that our 3-year plan I'd already torn up. Our 1-year plan probably wasn't going to be an achievable plan. We immediately started working on the better plan. So what do we think we can do from a financial perspective? What do we think we can achieve in terms of product innovation? What do we want to explore in terms of other partnerships? So we immediately started to create the better plan, not only with our executive team, but pushing that down as far as I could in the organization to get input. And the third thing was this idea of working together very, very quickly. We do run a process at Linkage called the BPR, the Business Plan Review. That's another thing that Alan really helped me instill. He ran the Ford Motor Company as well as Boeing Aircraft using this plan. Every single leader, business unit leader or functional leader, comes together every single week for an hour and a half. And then we have sub meetings as needed in between, where we're constantly looking at the external environment, our better plan, and the strategy, and constantly iterating on what's working, what's not. If it's not working, let's bring a cross-functional group together. So it's allowed this process of working together.
That's a terrific story. Alan has been a wonderful inspiration to me. He contributed to Grace. He endorsed the book, and he lives Grace. And the example of mentoring you is one more example of how he's continuing to change the world for the better. He's a good man, and we've all learned much from him. And it's great that you have the opportunity to do that. So now let's switch a little. One of the things that Linkage does is works in women in leadership. Let's focus on ambition. Men, I will say, are praised for ambition. Oh, he's ambitious. That's great. However, a woman, she's ambitious. It's usually used in a pejorative sense. How do you address that? How do you counsel young women about this?
So I love this topic, John, and I'm actually thrilled that we had the chance to write about it recently, especially in this kind of political campaign era. I've been actually dealing with this as a woman leader and a woman executive for the better part of 25 years, but it hasn't been until recently that, with my deeper understanding of the bias, that I've been able to make sense of it. So just very precisely, unlike men, women who aspire to leadership experience what we call this double bind. So we are either filled with kind of the feminine stereotype of being likable, so soft or kind or collaborative, or we're kind of filled with the male stereotype of assertiveness, so tough, competitive, and brave. Unfortunately, based on this bias, it's one or the other, but not both. So if women are likable, they can't be assertive. If they're assertive, they can't be likable. Let me paint you the most vivid example from my own life was early in my career. I was working at the Coca-Cola company. We were an Olympic sponsor. And so I had to work very collaboratively with the Olympic organizing committee. They wanted the pure Olympics with no logos. We wanted to make sure Coca-Cola was rightfully presented. And so there was this natural tension. One of my colleagues came to me and said, at the last Olympic committee meeting, one of the team members described you as a cupcake with a razor blade.
that's
and it was a man who had mentioned this to me, and he kind of laughed. He thought it was funny. Yeah. And so looking back, that's exactly the problem. An ambitious, assertive woman can be sweet like a cupcake, but it's got a razor blade, and that's not necessarily a good thing. So this is very significant bias against women's ambition. What I love now is we're talking about it. Number one, books are being written about it. So Unapologetically Ambitious is a brand new book by Shelley Ochambeau. She's actually speaking on a panel, a race and leadership panel at the Linkage Women in Leadership Institute. We have to raise this and start to dispel this bias that exists for women.
Well, the great thing about the issue of bias is to identify it and call it out. And there are none of us who are free of bias. That's part of our human condition. The way to growth is to acknowledge that bias. And you and I, you have been a wonderful person I can call on to help me with articles I've worked on, and you provided some great quotes. And we were talking about this very issue as well as assertiveness in women. And you said it's not up to women to change. Organizations need to change. So where do we begin?
This is so important. What most organizations have done historically to fix the issue of women's underrepresentation or even racial underrepresentation is to work on that population themselves. Inherently, by itself, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it could look like setting diversity targets or putting programs in place to ensure appropriate mentorship or sponsorship or development. Those things are important, and I don't want to diminish them. They are just insufficient. So if the assumption is that once we fix the leadership opportunities for women or race or any other form of underrepresentation, then we're going to be all done, that is absolutely incorrect. And the reason is because equally important, you have to look at the organizational, we call them levers that have to be addressed. And at Linkage, we've identified these levers through our research, and we can measure those so we can support organizations in the strategy. So let me tell you what they are. The first is culture. If we're not addressing culture to support that feeling of belonging and engagement of these women and other underrepresented populations, they're not going to stay. They're not going to be attracted to the organization, no matter how much you spend on their development. The second is executive action. Women have to be able to look up and see that their executives are doing more than just either checking the box or kind of talking the talk. They've got to be acting and walking the walk. They're demonstrating commitment and they're demonstrating action in terms of their sponsorship and desire and commitment to advance women. And the third thing is talent systems. And you've got to have fair and equitable talent systems so you're not attracting and promoting the people that look like you. And so trying to erase bias, as you mentioned, from those talent systems and looking at things like stretch assignments, looking at things like high potential programs, your interviewing and your talent acquisition processes are all important as well.
That's great. And I'm glad you talked about that because that's so important. And one of the ways that you organizations change, and you are at Linkage, is actively working on this. And you have an upcoming conference, the Linkage Women in Leadership Institute. Tell us about that and what are you expecting this year?
So this is the first year in 21 years that it will be a 100% virtual conference. So we are, as I mentioned, rapidly innovating in the conference industry. So one of the things I'm really excited about is because it's virtual, we're able to move deeper in an organization and maybe broader geographically where people wouldn't naturally be able to come. And we've sold out this conference for many years in a row. It's always been a live conference with about 1,200 women. Probably more importantly, we've actually created an experience that will allow for the very deep immersive development experience, from assessments that you take before coming in to the keynotes and master classes and learning teams and very curated networking. So we've learned a lot over the last 6 months with conferences that have had to pivot like ours, but we've had some time to really look at what we hope to be the future of the conference industry, because it doesn't look like we're going to be live again for at least the next 6 months.
Right. So networking is so critical. How are you, I'll use the term, skinning the cat when it comes to digital networking? How does that work? So
this is part of the innovation. And believe me, this is not easy. So we have, I don't know if I mentioned, the conference is from November 9th through 12th. We've got huge big name speakers like Glennon Doyle and Soledad O'Brien and Carla Harris and many, many others. We've got master classes. We've got to help more deeply develop the critical skills that we know women need to advance. And then we've got learning teams where you apply all that in smaller groups. When it comes to the networking, as you mentioned, we're looking at really intentionally curated software that will allow women to say, I'm interested in this topic with this type of a group, and you can actually intentionally move into networking, which is very different from a live conference where you're kind of accidentally bumping into people and hoping that they're the right people that you want to meet. So hopefully some of the innovation will even be better.
Right. Our colleague Tasha Yuriko was talking about this, the ability with chat and with isolation. In some ways, you can deliver a keynote, at least from Tasha's standpoint, and have a connection with people who directly, especially in chat, and address those questions. So I'm assuming with a networking thing, with digital chat rooms or whatever, there can be a true connection. Am I correct in there?
So that's the idea. Again, we believe this conference is going to be really pushing pushing us forward, even kind of greater than what we've seen in the last 6 months, as we've had to pivot really rapidly. So you'll actually experience this as if you are an avatar moving into the conference. You'll be walking into the keynote rooms and walking into the breakouts. And so, so the networking will feel like you're kind of bumping into new friends.
That's exciting. I like that. And you'll learn from it, and it'll come out better. Let's just give a twist on this. So how can we men become better allies for our women colleagues in the workforce?
We wrote about this too, I think, John, together many months ago. And first of all, one of the reasons that I'm actually, Alan Mulally will be at our conference and we're doing a fireside chat, is to talk about this very thing. What is the critical role of the leadership majority, which is 70% white men still, in supporting the advancement of women? So the first is acknowledging the critical role they play. Whether they're peers or whether they have the ability to hire and promote, it's critical that they acknowledge that women and other underrepresented populations are at a disadvantage, and they have a role to play in, number one, calling it out, number two, behind closed doors, intentionally advocating for women, and number three, making sure that on your succession plans that you are always talking about this. Are we bringing in for consideration the right diversity of population? And with those three things, I think we can come a long way.
Yeah. I'm glad you talked about this behind closed doors, because that's something that Fiona McCauley, whom you know, and she's at Georgetown and also does a conference too, the Wild Network. And she talked about exactly that thing, a kind of sponsorship of women and of calling it out and saying, hey, Jennifer is doing a great job in this, or being in her corner. And I thought that's a powerful concept, and I think even men can do it. So
I know men can do it. And so that's behind closed doors. Like, in a meeting, it's also really critical. So we just are surfacing brand new research. No one has even seen it yet. So we're going to release it next month. The number one factor in inclusive organizations, and the factor that drives inclusion in organizations, is inclusive meetings. So for men, and what you just mentioned, I would call a micro affirmation if it's done in front of someone. Like, Jennifer, what you said was really important, and I want to reiterate that. So for a white man to say that, it means a lot. Conversely, microaggressions, which are mostly done unintentionally, can have the opposite effect. In fact, it just happened on a call last night. I was on a call with a new group I hadn't been a part of. There were 2 women and 2 men in the group, and one of the men, and it wasn't, it was a multicultural group, so there was some culture at play, asked each woman to take notes. Oh. And we were all peers, we were all CEOs, and I almost said, do you realize what's happening here? But I didn't, but I could have.
Well, that's interesting, and I've heard this, and our colleague Sally Helgeson wrote a book on this, habits that hold women back and how women rise. And your women's graciousness sometimes holds them back, because if you said to a CEO, why don't you take the notes? He'd go, what? I don't take notes, but women are gracious. Oh, okay. And which is kind and generous and all those things. Sadly, it marginalizes.
Absolutely. And had I been a little bit more comfortable and felt a little safer, again, this was a new group, I didn't know anybody, I would have called it out. And in fact, we do have a book called, akin to Sally's 12 Habits. We have a book called Mastering Your Inner Critic, and the other 7 hurdles to women's advancement. And we actually talk about that. What is the confidence that you have to be able to stake what you want? And, last night, I didn't feel that way, but I would next time.
Yeah. Well, see, and thank you for being candid about that, because I think we all go, gosh, I wish I would have done that. But resolve, and I'm not lecturing, but let's make it, because I know my big thing is I can be impatient at times and lash out about ridiculous things. So I'm calling myself on the carpet, resolve to do better the next time. So
I love that. Thank you, John.
Yeah, that's great. We want to get you, tell you an example. I always ask everyone on our calls to tell us an example of grace in their own life. And I know you have a good story about this.
I do. So I was really struggling in the April-May timeframe, when it was the harsh reality that for the good of the greater business, we needed to let some staff go. And I was really struggling with, how do I lead through this? Because I knew it was going to be, I'd only been the CEO for 1.5 years. I knew this was going to be a big blow to the firm. And Whitney Johnson, who's also a mutual friend of ours and an amazing thought leader on personal disruption and innovation, asked me a simple question and said, what would it look like to have people leave the organization with complete dignity? She didn't answer the question. She just posed the question. And I thought about it for several days. And because of that conversation I had with her, I worked with the executive team. And I'm actually really proud of this, which is why I want to raise it, because it's I think one of the hardest things to do as a CEO is to make decisions that impact people's lives and livelihood. And we made the decision that we were going to take care of each person individually. We couldn't do it with huge severance packages, but we were going to do it with transition time, with one-on-one conversations, with the promise that we would help them find a new job. And as our business recovered, we would invite them back. And we already have rehired 1 or 2 of the employees, and we are in communication with almost every single one of them. And they were actually sending thank you emails to me on their way out, and wishing Linkage well, which to me was, it just was very heartfelt.
That's a powerful example of grace. And I will say, as your colleague, and I remember you wrestling with this issue, and all of us. And while you give so much credit to MG100 for helping you, I think we are a better organization for your leadership, for your candor, your ability to share your stories with us, because that made us more cognizant of what leaders are experiencing now. So on behalf of the team, I say thank you, Jennifer. So, Jennifer, how can people find you in Linkage? So,
the easiest way to find us is on our website. So it's www.linkageinc.com. I would love it if you were interested in learning more about our either leadership work or our women work. There's our one book is Mastering Your Inner Critic. The other one,
no rush, take your time.
Become the Path, are the 5 Commitments of Purposeful Leadership. And both of those are available on Amazon. And lastly, for all of you women out there, if you'd like to join us at our Women in Leadership Institute, November 9th through 12th, we would welcome you with open arms. And if you can find us through John, I would be happy to extend a discount code for you. John will just have to figure out how to do that.
Absolutely. And I endorse you and the team and Linkage. Again, I've known about you for decades. So it's a highly reputable organization. So if you are, I will second your thought about joining the conference if it's on your radar. Anyway, thank you very much. With that, we'll close out. And I appreciate your sharing your good stories and your insights. Jennifer, you've been a terrific guest.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be here.